Welcome back. In this step, we would start with an important Spring Cloud component called Feign. Feign. One of the things which we have already encountered when we were developing the currency conversion service is how difficult it was to call a REST service. There was a lot of manual stuff that we had to do to call a very simple service. There was no complexity involved at all, but we had to still write a lot of code for it. When we talk about microservices, there will be a lot of calls to other services. You'd want your code to be much simpler than this. That's one of the important problem Feign solves. Feign makes it very easy to invoke other microservices, other RESTful services. The other additional thing that Feign provides is it provides integration with something called Ribbon, which is a client-side load balancing framework. We will talk about that when we talk about Ribbon in detail in one of the next steps, but let's focus on the problem one that Feign solves. That's invoking other microservices. Let's focus on that in this specific video. Let's open up the pom.xml for the currency conversion controller and add the dependency for Feign. Feign is one of the components that Spring Cloud inherits from Netflix, and the dependency that you need to add, as usual, is very simple. Spring Cloud Starter Feign. As simple as that. Make sure that you have the dependency management for Spring Clouds present in here. So we already have the dependency management for Spring Cloud dependencies present in here. So all that I needed to do is to add in the dependency for Spring Cloud Starter Feign. You would see that the dependency would be made available to us in our class path very soon. If this is the first time you're using Feign, then this might take a little while because this has to download the Feign and its dependencies. Now, Feign is available. One of the important things that we have to do is to enable Feign. So once we have the dependency added in, what we would need to do is to enable Feign. We would want to enable Feign to scan for clients. How do I do that? The annotation is enable Feign clients. And over here, we need to pass in the packages we would need to scan. So I would have all the Feign clients in this package. So I would need to pass this in and I can organize the imports. You can see that this is from the package Cloud Netflix Feign enable Feign clients. Now we have Feign enabled on our project. So what do we need to do to use Feign to invoke the service? Just like we use a repository to talk to JPA, we need to create a Feign proxy to be able to talk to an external microservice. So let's create a Feign proxy right now. I'll create a new class. Actually, I have to create a new interface. I would want to call this as currency exchange. The service which we are going to invoke is currency exchange, right? So currency exchange service proxy and say finish. Once we define the interface, we would need an annotation on top of it. The annotation is Feign client. This is a Feign client, right? This is going to use Feign to talk to an external microservice. So it's Feign client, and I would need to pass in a couple of attributes. One is the name, the other one is the URL. Very important over here is to give the name of the service which we are going to call. So the service which we are going to consume is this currency exchange service, and I'm now going to take the application.properties of the currency exchange service and take the name from there. That's currency exchange service. For now, the name property is not really important, but when we start talking with a name server and when we start using Ribbon, the name of the application would become much more important. For now, the important part is the URL. So localhost, where is the currency exchange service? Which instance that do we want to talk to? Currency exchange service is currently deployed on port 8000. That's the one we want to talk to. So the URL is localhost 8000. Let's organize the imports. Feign client is imported in Cloud Netflix Feign client. And over here, now we have to define a method to talk to the currency exchange service. What I'll do is I'll open up the currency exchange controller. I'll open up the currency exchange controller and take the mapping from here. This is the specific service which we want to call. We want to call the currency exchange service from to. So this is the one which we would want to call. The only thing that we would need to take care of is the exchange value. This application does not use exchange value. This is part of the currency conversion service. In the currency conversion service, we only know about the currency conversion bean. So we'll take currency conversion bean as the output. Let's organize the imports. All that we had to do is to take the definition of the method from the currency exchange controller and make a few simple modifications in terms of the return values. That's all we would need to do to create a simple proxy which uses Feign to enable us to call this service. We are configuring the URL in here. Now currency exchange service proxy has all the details. It knows what URL to call, and it knows the URI of the service, and it knows the from and the to. That's basically the path variables. Let's see what would happen when we try to invoke the service through the currency exchange service proxy. How do we do that? For that, what we'll do is we will not change the existing method. I'll leave the existing method as is. I'll copy it and make a new version of it with a new URI. So I'll call this currency converter FEIGN. Nothing else changes, so I'll say convert currency Feign. I would want to leave the original service so that if we have any problems with this service, we would be able to check if the original service is working fine. For us, we would want to make use of the proxy. So I would need to create an instance of this. I'll go to the currency conversion controller, private. I'll call this just a proxy and auto wire it in. Organize the imports. Now the proxy is ready. Now you can see how simple it would become. So to get the response, we had to do a lot of things earlier. Now all that I would need to do is I don't need to do any of this. Proxy dot retrieve exchange value from to, and that's it. I can remove the response entity dot get body and all the code that was present in here. So you can see how simple it becomes, right? If this works, obviously. Before we test this, let's make sure that the currency exchange service is running. Yep, it's running fine. And let's go to our currency converter. This is the usual one, currency converter. This is not launched up fine. So let's see if it's launched up. What I'll do is I'll stop and start it. I'll stop the currency conversion service and start it again. One of the things is we have changed the dependencies. So it's very important that we need to start the application again or restart the application again. When I restart the application, I get an error saying path variable annotation was empty on param 0. One of the important things is when you are using Feign, you need to specify the exact path variable in here. I'll add it in path variable from, and this is path variable to. This is one of the bugs I would say in Feign. Actually, it can infer the fact that this is from the name of the variable, but it doesn't. For now, we have to add the from in here as well, from and to over here. Let's stop this and kick it off again. So currency conversion service application. Now the application has started fine. That's very cool. And let's go to the URI and see if the usual URL is working fine. Yep, the currency converter URL is working fine. Now I would want to see if the Feign URL also is working fine. So currency converter Feign, that's the URI we configured, right? So what's the URI we configured? It's currency converter Feign. That's cool. Currency converter Feign. Okay, you can see that it's returning exactly the same response back. I can try the other stuff as well, EUR to INR, and you would see exactly the same response back. I mean, the values change, but we are getting a successful response back. So now this request which we are sending is using Feign. In this long first step of Spring Cloud, we looked at something called Feign. Feign is a REST service client. It makes it easy to call RESTful web services. When we used REST template to call the service, it was really complex. I had to write a lot of complex code, Actually, a lot of simple code, but unnecessary duplication kind of a code to talk to the RESTful service. With Feign, all that I would need to do is to define a simple proxy. We defined a currency exchange service proxy, and we defined a simple method on it. And we were able to use that proxy to make the calls to the service. Feign helps us to simplify the client code to talk to a RESTful web service. Imagine a scenario where this currency exchange service is offering 15 services. All the details of how to talk to those services would be present in just one place inside this currency exchange service proxy. All the rest of the application need not know that currency exchange service is a RESTful service. I'm talking to a other application. As far as the other component classes go, you just talk to the proxy. You are not worried about how the proxy is getting the details from the service. You just call a method on the proxy and you get the details back. In this step, we used Feign to create a proxy to be able to talk to a service. All that we had to do was to add Feign dependency to our project, enable Feign clients, and we just needed to create a proxy, and then we were ready. We were able to use the proxy and call the service. Until the next step, bye bye.